Hello, everybody. Another room rumble, and this one's back at Gangster Ghost, who I've really been enjoying hanging out in. I think that the people there, although some may disagree vehemently with me, some of the people there are wonderful, like Big Bad Mama and Logan himself, and Aiden sometimes over there. Really, really cool people to talk to, and even the people that disagree with me seem to be. Um, not too bad. I mean, I kind of find some of the interactions funny, which is always a plus. But this one's interesting. It was basically that Gangster Ghost contacted me and sort of said, "Hey, do you want to debate Dustin, who from the last Room Rumble called Bustin' Dustin?" We had a bit of I want to say run in, but he really ran into me. I feel like it was like a rear end crash, like I wasn't moving and he just plowed into me. But that set aside, it was like a debate, so I of course agreed, and yes, absolutely would love to debate it. And the topic was evolution, which is it's one of my favorites, so I'd love to be there. And then it was kind of moved to a discussion, just sort of a discussion on evolution, just questions back and forth. And I'm fine with that too. Like it was creation versus evolution, sort of a discussion between the two worldviews. And, I'm always up for a discussion as well. I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem at all. So I get there and Dustin doesn't show up. He just isn't present. So um, it's I'm not going to say anything bad about him, but to me it is unprofessional. He did send Mark Stoney, who came in later, to sort of participate in it, but I sort of got up early and sort of prepared myself and everything like I do for all discussions or debates. So I did find it a little bit rude, but these things happen. And it was an opportunity because Gangster Ghost sort of said, "Is there something you can present? Just do a presentation of some sort." So I just pulled out an old debate slides and just did the introduction for the ERV and chromosome 2 fusion sort of demonstrations that I've done in previous debates. I think I did one against Kent. I can't remember. It may have been modern day that I did it at. I can't remember, but I just pulled out an old one. But it was a good conversation overall. Mark Stoney was a really nice guy. Very curious, and asked good questions, and just a really good interaction. And he sort of had a conversation about his side, and then I talked to a few other people. Just really good conversation all around, explaining how we know things are evolved, explaining the role of science and all of this. I got to ask a few questions on their worldview. So yeah, all in all, it was actually really good. So maybe it's good Dustin didn't show up, but I kind of feel like yeah, I kind of feel like I missed the the absolute furor that often comes with Dustin coming in and giving me a hard time. But never mind. It was a good conversation. So um, let's get ready to rumble.
Here with talk with Mark Reid and Big Bad Mama.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. Thanks you, Logan, for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's apparently Dustin isn't going to be here. Is that correct, Logan?
Yeah,
Yeah. So unfortunately, I do apologize. One of the people is a no show. Decided not to come. Did give warning, but not a lot of it. So we decided to go ahead with it, which is probably a good idea to, give you some content and give you something to watch and maybe something entertaining. So I think we agreed that I'd be presenting the evolution side of things. And perhaps Dustin can respond to it in his own time, or maybe watch it and learn a few things about evolution. But I can get an old sort of, I've got presentations that I've done for debates. I can grab one of them if you give me a second. And we can sort of go through a couple of the main evidence for evolution that we do have on record. Yeah, it's I'm sorry, Logan. It's really disappointing that you scheduled this and we don't have a thing going. But
Sorry.
you know, we'll do something. We'll do something. And I'm more than happy to answer questions about it to the best of my ability. Of course, I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I want to make that clear. I'm not an expert, but I have sort of looked into it, and I do understand at least the basics of the theory. So,
I think
yeah.
this is good. I think we can get some more information out this way. So,
Okay. I just have to share my screen. If that's okay. There it is. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm a little unfamiliar with this particular program, Restream. I've used it a couple of times. Just I'm more familiar with StreamYard and Zoom. Okay. Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Right, so this is the main evidence for evolution. Now, what you've got to understand is evolution is both a fact and a theory, and I'll sort of go quickly through what they mean. It's a fact because the definition of evolution is change of allele frequency over time, over successive generations. But don't worry about allele frequency. All it means is just change in sort of attributes over time, physical attributes over time. So that's all it means, that things change over time. Now, anybody that's bred any animals, anybody that sort of understands where cabbages and Brussels sprouts come from, they all know that you can breed and things change over time. So that's why evolution is a fact. Because even if you believe in sort of short-term change over time, that's still evolution. Now, the theory of evolution is how we model that, how we describe how it works. Now, you may disagree with that, but evolution is still a fact. Things do change over time. That is, not. I don't know how anybody could argue otherwise. So basically, evolution, it's heritable characteristics over time. Sorry. It only addresses diversity of life as well. It doesn't address where life came from, which is usually abiogenesis. It's only talking about why biodiversity exists, why there are all of these different sort of animals, these different species of animals, and it goes into why they're living in the places where they're living and why they're adapted to the places that they're adapted to. The word theory often gets a bit of sort of people say it's only a theory. In science, theory is the highest graduation of an idea. You can't get any more certain of something in science than a theory. So the theory of gravity, the germ theory of disease, these things we really do have a lot of confidence in. It's not like sort of the colloquial use where you say, hey, I have a theory about, Bill Clinton doing this kind of thing. Yeah, that's not how we mean it. Now, there's a few evidences that lead us to the same place, and this is sort of why we have a lot of evidence. It's because all of this evidence supports one another. Actually, there's way more than what I put on the screen here. I couldn't fit them into the screen, but there's multiple converging lines of evidence, and they all point at exactly the same answer. They're accounted for by religious fundamentalists and tried to explain away by religious fundamentalists, but without success. I don't really have time to cover them all. I really want to focus on just a few in this, and because my presentation only has a few in it, basically, but I think they're the strongest ones. So we're going to be focusing on genetics and paleontology. And also, the thing you've got to remember is these have novel testable predictions. Novel testable predictions are basically when we expect to find something that's not known or unconsidered or something we're not sure of. We make a prediction that is true, and it in fact turns out to be true. There's so many of these testable predictions associated with evolution, but I'll try to give at least one for each line of evidence: genetics and paleontology. So first off, paleontology. Fossils provide solid evidence that organisms from the past aren't the same as today. They show a progression of evolution. Fossils, along with the comparative anatomy of present-day organisms, constitute a morphological or anatomical record of these organisms. By comparing the anatomies of both modern and extinct species, paleontologists can infer the lineages of their species. It's most successful with the organisms that had hard bodies, but it tells a story of the past and shows the evolution over millions of years. We always predict, and this is one of the predictions I'm talking about, that we'll find more basal, simpler organisms lower down in the strata, and therefore older into the past. And that's what we always find. For instance, you won't find birds below the sort of tertiary era. You won't find dinosaurs below the sort of Permian era. These things, there's no reason why under a creationist model that there aren't these more modern creatures further down in the fossil record. This is another test of a prediction. This is Archaeopteryx. It was first uncovered in Jurassic limestone of Bavaria. It was just 2 years after Darwin's Origin of Species. It appeared to be one of Darwin's missing links, as they call it, and that's the link between reptiles and birds, or specifically between dinosaurs and birds. Now, that's a bit of a mischaracterization, because dinosaurs are still birds. So basically how it works is nothing ever changes from what it was. So birds are still dinosaurs. Dinosaurs still are reptiles. Reptiles still are eukaryotes. You never move out of the clade or the classification that you were in. This is only one of the Archaeopteryx found. Over the years, 12 have been found. Hilariously, Ray Comfort in 2007 said, asked Kirk Cameron, like, did they expect to see a crocodile? 2 years later, they found a Natchisuchus, and it's called a duck crocodile. It had a crocodile-like body and a broad, flat, duck-like snout. So these are mosaic species, ones that have traits of both the more primitive ancestor and the more modern ancestor. And Darwin predicted this. He said it would have unfused wing fingers, and then we found it, the bird with unfused wing fingers. This is Tiktaalik. This is where the evolutionary theory, the model that we have about evolution, can help us find things to demonstrate that it's true. This was predicted that we would find a tetrapod that was very sort of fish-like, a missing link between fish and tetrapods, if you will. They basically predicted where in the strata it would be, went to Canada to where that strata existed, and found exactly what they were looking for. An amazing prediction that absolutely was sort of allowed them to lead them to where it actually was in the fossil record. So this is where it turns to genetics, and this might be a bit complicated. I'm going to go through an overview of endogenous retroviruses. I'll go through a quick explanation, but I do want to talk about them because they're the strongest evidence for evolution, apart from, of course, everything sharing a genetic code throughout throughout life. Every single organism has the same genetic sequence of 4 TACG base pairs. But how do we know that those base pairs are actually sort of that one had an ancestor of another? And that's where retroviruses is so strong. So a retrovirus is where a virus makes a copy of itself. The DNA makes a copy of itself and inserts itself into an organism's DNA, and it basically inserts that sequence into the DNA of its host, and then the host replicates it. And an example of this is the HIV virus, for instance. So the virus that gives you AIDS. It basically will insert itself into the cell's host DNA. It replicates, and that infects other cells in an organism's body. So it's using the resources of its host to replicate itself. So it describes that DNA sequence, and it then includes the DNA sequence of the virus, which it's called proviral insertion. Now, it's a very distinct structure, as you see on the right here. It's got a long terminal repeat, GAG, pol, ENV, and those are always that's always a viral structure. Now, it's important to note that the LTR on either side, they're not part of the viral structure. Those long terminal repeats are formed when the virus actually inserts itself. They're almost like scars of the insertion process. So that's how we absolutely know that they're viral sequences, because those are made by the insertion processes. And we've seen that in tons and tons of viral experiments that we've done. They always create these long terminal repeats when an enzyme called integrase cuts through and makes an opening in the DNA of the host. Now, how does the endogenous come about? So basically, what endogenous retroviruses are, or endogenized viruses are, they're viruses that have become a part of the lineage of an organism. So it occurs when a virus infects the germline. Now, the germline is either the egg or the sperm. So just say it infects an egg, when that egg starts doubling, and so when the egg cell, the ovum starts doubling when it grows, it starts from 1, then splits into 2, splits into 4, splits into 8, and keeps doubling. And that's how the growth of, say, a baby or a embryo happens. It keeps doubling. So if that egg was infected by a retrovirus, and a retrovirus inserted its DNA, the cells of that organism will keep duplicating with the same viral sequence in it, right? So, so basically, if that original cell got infected, the infection will be at the same place in the DNA sequence through every cell in an organism's body. Because instead of infecting one cell in your body and then spreading to other cells in your body, and what you've got to understand is when a cell is infected, it's kind of like at a random place. There are viral insertion points, and it finds one of these points around the outside. But because the DNA is looped up crazy like inside the cell, if something is a somatic or just infected from other locations in your body, it'll just be in a random place. These sequences are in the same place in every single piece of DNA in the body. So basically what that means is that the germline got infected. The original cell that we all grow from, the original egg or the original sperm, the original cell had that retrovirus infection or that viral infection, and then it duplicated throughout the body. Now, it becomes fixed when it becomes a standard part of that organism, when it becomes a standard part of their DNA. Now, it's important to note that all of that DNA in your body is subject to mutation, and this is where mutation comes into it. So random mutations occur, spot mutations. We have things like duplication, where a DNA sequence is repeated. We have things like omission, where a DNA sequence is lost in the DNA because it doesn't copy. We have substitution, where 2 areas in the DNA are substituted with one another. There's a few different types. But if that retrovirus mutates, it can actually become beneficial to the organism. And because it's beneficial to the organism, basically it means that will be favorable to that organism to survive. And then we get into natural selection, where because something's favorable for the organism to survive, it will be replicated into the population of animals. Now, this on the screen, we have the SIRH family of retroviruses. Now, these retroviruses, basically, we can tell that they were infected about 166 million years ago. But what happened was some of them split off in different ways as that retrovirus mutated. So we have the PEG-10 series, which basically the SIRH12 is marsupials like wallabies and things like that. Now, they don't use a placenta like the placental mammals, the eutherians, the humans and horses and cows and all the ones that are placental mammals. They use a pouch system. So we know that they were split off before say the monotremes, before the eutherians came about, and the monotremes earlier still, because the monotremes like the platypus and echidna still lay eggs, and we still have those retroviruses in the lineage of these animals. It's just that the retrovirus of the SIRH isn't in the monotremes, the platypus, things like that. So we know this split off, and we know that those animals sort of they split off before the infection. Tracking ERVs is insanely complicated. These are just sort of how we track them in humans and primates, our neighbors. So the HERV is a human endogenous retrovirus. Now, the reason why we know that these retroviruses and evolution is true is because we share some of the same retroviruses in exactly the same place that fish do. Yes, fish have human retroviruses in them, but they were infected when we weren't necessarily evolved into humans. Now, you might say, hey, how do we know that that's not, sort of a different virus? It can't be, because they're in exactly the same place. The chances of that happening are absurd, absolutely absurd. You have a better chance of going to a beach and picking out a random grain of sand that I sort of pre-selected. It's absolutely absurd. And this all looks confusing. It is. It's very confusing. Biology and genetics are messy. Sort of the nested hierarchy of it is really what I want you to understand. They have to be simplified for lay people like me and you. So kind of this is the thing that we put it into. We kind of put it into this, and it looks all simple and stuff. But I really want to get across that it's not simple. It's very complicated. But really, what we're doing is tracking where these ERVs inserted itself to our lineage. So we can tell when things split off one another. And yes, we share these same endogenous retroviral sequences as monkeys, gibbons, other great apes. We share them all. And this is a breakdown of the previous chart and how they would sort of work. Now, keep in mind that there's 8,000 separate ERVs in mammals alone, and 8% of our DNA is made up of retroviral fragments, some of which have been mutated to be inactive. They don't do anything, or actually beneficial. So there's a massive list of segment information we can draw upon to untangle which organisms diverted from which. But think about it this way. What are the chances that 8,000 of these viruses inserted themselves into the germline of animals at exactly the same place with exactly the same virus? Think about that. It's impossible. The better explanation is that we had a common ancestor, and a sperm or egg cell ages ago, before we even became different species, was infected with the retrovirus. And then as we split apart, we both kept that virus in exactly the same place. That is the better explanation.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah.
Hey, I've got a question. Hang on a second. Let me turn this off.
I was in the middle of the presentation. I haven't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
finished.
Go ahead. Yeah, I'll hold my question.
Yeah, well, I was going to do sort of my end of the debate or discussion or whatever we were doing here before Dustin didn't show. Is it quick? Can I finish this and then we can go into it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Sorry. What was I? So is that it? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so how do we know they're actually viruses and not some kind of sort of designed thing is what I hear a lot. So this is the Phoenix Pro virus. This is I can't remember which one it was. I think it was so it was human 293 cells basically were infected. It's a HERVK virus, a very, very new one. So as mutations happen, these viral elements will get degraded. This is a relatively new one, and it doesn't do anything in our body. I'll have to look up which one it is. But we can see all of the characteristics of the virus here. So what they basically did is they changed some of the DNA in the viral sequence in the cell, and they brought it back to life. They basically resurrected a viral sequence in the DNA from an inactive endogenous retrovirus. So yeah, this is where they had infection of cells. They changed the DNA, and basically the sequence started producing viral elements like it had been a infected retrovirus. So we know they are retroviral elements that have been infected in the past because we have activated them again. Now, I want to be clear here and sort of give a disclaimer. Those viral elements that it was producing, those viral sequences that it was throwing out were pretty weak. They were not that great, but we really want to get across is we have reactivated these things that we say are viral elements to produce viral elements. The other DNA I want to go into is the chromosome 2 fusion. Since we have two less chromosomes than apes, it was predicted, and this is the sort of prediction we find, we should have a unique signature of chromosome fusion in the genome of humans. Basically, what basically the telomeres, which are the sequences on the end of chromosomes, we predicted that there would be highly replicated groups, and this is important, highly replicated groups of sequences that reverse in their pattern. So as we go to the end, it would be like putting two sort of bookends end to end, right? So what we should see is the sequence go one way and then the other way, because they're two ends that have been put together. They also should be highly degraded, because if they weren't highly degraded, then it would just be a telomere, which is the end of a chromosome. It signals the end. So we found exactly what we predicted. We found the site where the telomeres went one way, then it went the other, and we sort of have an idea of where the cryptic centromere 2, the middle of the chromosome 2 is. So this was a prediction that was made, and then it was actually found. We see a large amount of duplications in the center of chromosome 2. Analysis shows two head-to-head, and that's the important part. It's head-to-head. It basically means that these two are in opposite sequence. It repeats it. It's 2q fusion site with no other sequence in between the arrays. So the question is, how large is this sequence? It's 798 bases. So that is a highly that's a large amount of sequences. It has been opined that interstitial sequences have occurred, but we don't know that for sure. But don't forget, this is highly degraded, which is exactly what we would expect. For the context, usual repeats of this type are 2 or 3, and they lack the unique repetitions that chromosome 2 fusion site has. So that's the other one on DNA, and that's sort of where I'll end it. So thank you. I'm sorry, Mark. I do apologize, mate. I just wanted to wrap up.
Yeah, no worries at all. I didn't mean to interrupt. I kind of came
Oh,
in
no,
late,
no
so I
worries.
wasn't sure this was a presentation, a discussion,
Well,
a debate.
it
I was
was.
asked to stand in for Dustin earlier, and
Oh,
I've kind
really?
of, yeah. Well, I wasn't prepared to do a debate or anything, but I'm
Okay.
more than happy to engage in the discussion
Oh, sure, sure.
from
Yeah,
a
no,
creationist perspective.
yeah, it was sort of just it was sort of first a debate and then it went to a discussion. So really, I'm happy to have a discussion with you, but we didn't think anyone was showing up. Mark, I do apologize, mate. We didn't think anyone was showing up, so I just offered to do one of my old presentations from a debate. But
Sure.
it's not a debate. It's just, yeah, I was just doing one of the old presentations from it to show
Yeah,
why
I
we.
want to discuss too, definitely.
Yeah, it's much appreciated. Yeah, I was learning some stuff I hadn't heard before. So,
No problem at all.
but what I wanted to ask, you
Yeah.
say that the statistics of finding the same retroviruses in other animals that humans have, the contrary to that is statistically impossible in a sense, correct? I'm not trying to
Yeah.
misrepresent your argument.
Yeah, so the way it works is that so you've got a cell basically, and we know they're retroviruses because of the structure of this segment and the long terminal repeats that are made, the cuts that are made. So they're like scars. I mean, they're not exactly, but they're not part of the viral sequence. They're made when a virus inserts itself in a host DNA. And
Sure.
we compare this to all HIV and all of the sequences kind of thing. So if just say we each had an infection, a somatic infection, which is a horizontal infection, where just say I give you a virus kind of thing, right? That's a horizontal transmission, like I pass a virus to you somehow, and
Okay.
it infects you. So in me, what you'd find is my cell would have it would be in one location, but in you it would be in a different location. The chances of it being in the same location is highly improbable. So highly improbable it's almost impossible, because there's sort of there is insertion points because it has to insert in the outside of the cell, the shell of the cell. It's got to insert somewhere around it. But if you think of DNA as sort of this ribbon bundled up inside the cell, right? Like just say you have a ribbon bundled up inside the cell.
Sure.
Whichever point it comes in at, it'll just find the outer edge kind of thing. So the question has to be asked, what are the chances that both you and I will get infected? The virus that I pass to you, it goes to the same cell, it goes to your cell and it finds the exact same point around the cell. And what we know it's in germline because did you hear the germline part?
I think I came in right after that probably. I wasn't
Okay.
in for very long.
Okay, so we know that it's the germline because these sequences in our body, it's about 8% of our DNA where it has this structure of a virus. They're in the same place in every cell of our body. It has become a part of the normal human DNA. So what that means is, and how they explain that is that at some point either an egg or an over or a sperm has been infected, the germline. And so when you have the germline infection, what happens to the egg? It gets the DNA from the male inside of it, and then it starts to replicate, right? So it goes, one egg, if you remember from the sort of, I don't know if you had sex ed or whatever in high school or whatever. It goes, then splits into 2, then 4, then 8, and that's how a person starts growing, right?
Right.
So the reason why it's in every single part of every single cell in exactly the same location is because a germline had to be infected to make that so. Right?
Yeah,
You with
sure.
me?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Okay. Okay, so some of these elements we share with other apes and fish and horses and all kinds of things, right? We share the same element in our DNA with them. Now, the explanation is that infection happened to a far back ancestor, like billion years ago, and it's been replicated ever since. So when that sort of primitive simian, say, had a baby, that sequence was replicated to both us and chimpanzees, for instance, and has
Okay.
kept replicating ever since.
Sure, I'm
So
following.
so the reason why I say it's the chances are absurd, because if you want to say that a virus infected both humans and apes, for instance, right, you'd have to say that that same virus attacked the sperm or egg of a human and a chimpanzee independently, and not only the same virus infected that egg or cell in both of them, it also infected exactly the same place around that cell.
Sure. So,
And we share 208 of them with chimpanzees. So that would also have to happen 208 times.
right. And that's out of how many gene sequences in the human genome?
Well, I mean, it's 8%.
8%?
Mhm.
That's and the argument is that for it to have happened otherwise is statistically impossible, or it would just be
Pretty
such a
much, yeah.
vast number.
Yeah,
I could use that argument and say with the Earth, and I'm not trying to distract. I am going to get right back to it, but with
sure.
the Earth being in the Goldilocks zone with the perfect conditions, like we've got a stable moon, we've got an
Mhm.
atmosphere, we've got water, all these things, and I'm just listing a few of them. Statistically, given how many planets we have discovered, which I would guess is in the tens of thousands, and then the number of stars and galaxies and other solar systems, we can assume that there's a whole lot more, but we've yet to discover any life on these planets. Would it not be equally fair to say that it's statistically impossible for that to have just happened?
Well, you've got to sort of make a few assumptions to say that that's statistically impossible. For instance, you've got to assume that there is no life on any of these exoplanets that you're talking about,
Sure.
which we can't tell. I mean, we can send a rover to Mars to look for life. We can't tell if life has arisen on any other planet. It may be that the conditions for life are very, very, there's only a tiny, tiny chance of that happening, sure, but we don't know that for sure.
Right.
Um,
There's a lot of
the
assumptions there.
Right, and the Goldilocks zone is actually bigger than what we once thought, kind of thing. And it may be that other types of planets will give rise to different types of life. We just don't know. And I'm
Right. And
not
who's to
saying
say
that.
our technology won't artificially expand that Goldilocks zone? I mean, we've got people trying to colonize Mars. So, I mean,
Well,
yeah.
I mean natural sort of
Oh,
life
sure, sure, sure.
forming, more than sort of colonization, which is a bit of a different story because we're using techno. Anyway, the whole point is that we don't know that humans are sort of a statistical anomaly or not. We have no idea, and so yeah, it could be very improbable that life arises, but the whole point is you've got multiple. So when you're looking at probability, you're looking at how many times it happened over how many chances of it could
Sure.
happening, right? So the problem comes that, so if you had multiple chances of life developing on Earth, for instance, just say you've got multiple chances, the statistics drops as you get more attempts. So just like any kind of probability, if you have to pick, the ball beneath three cups, if you have three chances, it's a certainty, right?
Right.
Or unless the guy doing it's dodgy, it's a certainty. Um, but if
I've
you're
seen some
talking
dodgy
about
folks in my day.
right, but if you're talking about the infection of a germline, you're really only the more chances you add, the more likely it is that it will happen. Right? So, if you have 3 chances, it's a certainty. If you have 2 chances, it's a certainty. 3 chances, it's a certainty. 4 chances, it's a certainty. 5 chances, it's a certainty. 6 chances, it's a certainty. 7 chances, it's a certainty. 8 chances, it's a certainty. 9 chances, it's a certainty. 10 chances, it's a certainty. 11 chances, it's a certainty. 12 chances, it's a certainty. 13 chances, it's a certainty. 14 chances, it's a certainty. 15 chances, it's a certainty. 16 chances, it's a certainty. 17 chances, it's a certainty. 18 chances, it's a certainty. 19 chances, it's a certainty. 20 chances, it's a certainty. 21 chances, it's a certainty. 22 chances, it's a certainty. 23 chances, it's a certainty. 24 chances, it's a certainty. 25 chances, it's a certainty. 26 chances, it's a certainty. 27 chances, it's a certainty. 28 chances, it's a certainty. 29 chances the more you increase the probability that it doesn't happen, right?
Sure.
Because what you're basically doing is saying, hey, let's put in these random points. The more it's random, the less chance of it actually happening.
So would it also be fair to say that there are assumptions going into that? What if this germline was a cross species contaminate? I don't know what it's called. I'm not a
Ah, yeah,
germ,
yeah.
but could infect both species. Like I know there's some things that can
Yep.
infect like birds and still infect humans and vice versa, and with pigs and stuff like that. And supposedly, bats can even transmit stuff to humans. What's to say there wasn't just like a pandemic or an epidemic at a time during our evolution, or just our history, that did infect both apes and humans, and I'm sure there's many other species that share ERVs with us as well. Are
Sure.
apes probably the most? Is that the highest percentage, would you say?
Yes.
Okay. But
Yeah.
to me, it would also seem fair to assume that something like that could have happened. There was a huge epidemic that uh, infected more than just one species. So I find
Okay.
it hard to say that, because we share this gene, this ERV, with another species, and it being in the same place, I just don't see it as necessarily following that it had to have happened because of common ancestry. I think there's other factors it could be considered for. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying I think that there's other avenues of approaching this issue.
Can I
Well,
get in here?
I think. Well, I just want to address that for 1 second. I think that is impossible because what you've got when you're looking at jumping species is essentially what you're looking at when a virus manages to cross species.
Hmm.
What you're looking at is, don't forget that they're in the same place in both us and the chimpanzee.
Right.
So what you're looking at is, if a chimpanzee gives me a virus, for instance, like somehow transmits a virus that jumps species, um, my cells will have it in a different place than the chimpanzees because of that insertion point as it comes in, right?
Yeah.
It will insert in a random place. But don't forget, they're in exactly the same place. So you're still looking at a ridiculous, chance of that happening, because don't forget, we share 208 of them in the same place on the DNA, so it hit the same location on the cell, and the same virus.
Not only that, can I get in here for a second?
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to sort of, yeah.
Then the number of ERV matches that we have also matches what we find with phylogenetics and our relationship to other organisms. So we share the most ERVs with apes, and next would be other mammals, going down to reptiles, amphibians, and fish in exactly what would be predicted. Correct, Mark?
Correct. And ERVs have actually allowed us to correct. We thought that, hey, this split off from this at this point, and finding this ERV information, we've gone, oh, actually, they share that ERV, so that split happened later rather than earlier than the infection point. So we've used them to help us build up sort of how these split off with one another. And you've got to understand that we're sort of saying it's a nested hierarchy, and that those words will come up a lot in evolution, a nested hierarchy. So
Yeah.
basically, you've got one organism, then it splits off into these different organisms, which splits off into these ones. And don't forget, this nested hierarchy existed before we even knew about ERVs, before we even knew about DNA, in fact. And what we found is they fit perfectly into it, like absolutely perfectly into it. Um,
Sure.
yeah, and that isn't sort of us saying, "Hey, we have to try and make it." No, it absolutely fits perfectly.
So
So
what
it,
are some examples of these? Like what's a specific one of these gene sequences, ERVs, that we share with, say, the
yeah,
chimpanzees or the lizards or wherever it is down the lineage?
yeah. So I think the best example I have is the SIRH sequence. I did go into it in my presentation. It
Yeah, I
basically,
came in the middle of that because I noticed you
okay.
saying H, which was funny to me. Go ahead. I'm
Sorry?
sorry.
What's
H. I speak American. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay, got. Yeah. Sorry. That's just my.
You,
Yeah,
you
I'm
probably
speaking
say
proper English over here.
you probably say Z as well.
I do actually. I do say Z, to be honest with you. So, yeah.
I won't hold
So
any of it against you. I just noticed that I noticed that when I came into the studio and heard you. That part of your presentation is when I came in, so I didn't get the
yeah. So
whole.
so there's so many of them. Shit, like the HERV series of retroviruses. You'll find them in apes and in mice, I believe. Like there's a whole lot of them. It's a super group of viruses. So it basically is sort of saying, hey, this viral element is in the same location, but it changes because not only does the organism belong to a nested hierarchy, the virus does as well. It mutates as well. And this is the important thing to understand, is that that viral sequence is just as prone to mutation and as any other sequence in our DNA. So Standing for Truth has a great paper on it saying, switching sides, how these retroviruses can actually be beneficial for us, that they can actually, if they mutate in a certain way and provide some kind of benefit, they'll be preserved as the organism goes along. So just say I'm infected by, and we see this, like the AIDS virus, it actually can prevent you from being infected by other viruses. But just say I contract HIV, and it mutates so that it doesn't keep producing HIV viral sequences, but it does keep the benefit of preventing other viruses from infecting that cell. If that happens in the germline, that's a huge benefit for me. That
So it almost
basically will.
becomes a vaccine in and of itself.
Yes, because that's what viruses do when they infect a cell. They basically try and prevent any other virus from infecting it because it doesn't want to share resources. It wants to replicate without being infected by anything else. Because
Sure.
don't forget, a virus can infect anywhere along that DNA strand. And if that is in the viral element, it will disrupt that virus. So it tries to protect against that. So if that happens, that's a huge advantage to the organism and conveys virus resistance. And we have seen that in HIV, where it basically has mutated. They don't get more infections, but it does protect them against that cell against being infected.
Isn't
And
it
and that
sickle cell if you have is it HIV you can't have sickle cell or is it I don't know. I've heard something
yeah,
there's a
that is
certain
another
virus you
mutation. Yeah, but
maybe it's
there
if you have
are.
sickle cell then you can't get certain other viruses, but it's still HIV, you know. It's still pretty that sucks. Uh,
Well,
I understand the element of it being beneficial in that you can't get these other viruses, and I understand the mechanism why it would act that way to prevent other viruses from coming, but it's still HIV. It's still deadly.
yeah, it's not. That's the thing. It's mutated. So it's basically lost all of the bad things that it's doing, and it provides resistance. It's a huge benefit to the organism.
So what is it? It's a do we have this? Like we have this trait,
It
you and
has
I,
been observed, yeah. No, but no,
that
the problem is with that we've observed it in cells, but don't forget, in order to be endogenized, it's got to be in the germline, right? It's got to be in the original sperm or egg, so it's duplicated throughout the entire body,
sure.
right? So we've seen it in cells that, hey, the HIV is not affecting, from this cell, is not affecting the immune system. It seems to have lost that capacity. It's lost the capacity to replicate. It just sits in there, and it's prevented that cell from being infected. But
So
we haven't
basically,
seen
like
it.
if a mother has HIV and she passes it down to a child, they may not have the negative
Correct.
effects. Okay.
Because of the mutation, yeah, and that's where mutations play a role. But we haven't seen it in this, but that's how it would work. But we're talking sort of. I'm not sure if you're a young Earth creationist, but we're talking sort of these things happening over millions and millions of years. For that to happen in a human lifespan, or the human, experience of 50,000 years or so, would definitely be unusual.
Right. I kind of lean towards the theory of punctuated equilibrium when there
Really?
was, yeah, when there was a smaller diversity that kind of over a short period and by very tremendous after the flood, we had a completely wild environments all over the earth. So these changes were necessary by environmental factors to happen on a rapid occurrence until everything kind of met an equilibrium in the environment with the not just the weather, but also the creatures, the plants, the animals, all across the board.
Yeah, I don't know, because the flood sort of assumes you're talking about a bottleneck of two individuals, which I mean, at the moment, cheetahs are down to, I think, 1,000. They're experiencing a bottleneck essentially, and they're
Sure.
down to thousands. Getting down to two individuals is that species is dead. There is
8,
not enough
actually.
Yeah.
genetic.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about the animals.
Oh,
Um,
right.
yeah, so getting down to, or 7 of the clean animals, if you will. I don't know which particular thing you subscribe to, but anyway, some of the animals were down to 2 species. That unless something has happened to preserve or diversify that genetics in some way, that's impossible, because you would end up with sterile, at the very least. You probably wouldn't get viable offspring from 2 animals keep replicating. That's death for those organisms. There's no possible way that could be the case. So what you're talking about isn't punctuated equilibrium. Punctuated equilibrium, and we're not. So punctuated equilibrium, I think Stephen Jay Gould had a problem with punctuated equilibrium. We have sort of a different model now. It's called integrated synthesis, where different things are integrated into the modern synthesis idea of evolution. But punctuated equilibrium is basically like things develop very fast and then they get slower. What you're talking about is a population bottleneck that would destroy the organism completely. Like that's a dead species.
Well, what I would say is that earlier on, our genetics were more pure and more stable than they are now. I would say that there were probably less.
What does that
Uh,
mean?
what does it mean
Yeah,
to
more pure. What does that
more
mean?
pure? Not so much that we're like a specific, gosh, not like Nazism, pure
Less
genetics or anything like
mutations,
that.
Mark?
Yeah, less mutations, no, none of that stuff. But like the ideal
Less
genetics
mutations.
for like a perfect creation, because I am a creationist, and Genesis says that God said it was good, and on the 6th day everything was very good. So I would say that we have enough junk DNA and stuff that's useless and even non-beneficial that it would, yeah, looking back, I would say that there was probably a time when there was less of that, and I guess that's what I mean by pure, but also
Well, there's a
stability.
problem there. If you just sorry, Mark, I don't mean to interrupt. I just want to address that for a second. There's a problem there, because if you've got 2 animals coming off the ark and just say they're the precursors to all cats, for instance, right? Would you
Hmm.
agree with that?
Sure.
Right.
Well,
In
I mean, I
order,
would say there's different cat kinds, not just
there's different
one
cat
single.
kinds.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there's just like one cat kind. I mean, there's such a
Okay, well
va-
let's take another example. Are there
yeah,
different bird kinds? What how do you?
sure. Well, like
Sure. Okay. So
seabirds, marine birds versus birds that live in like the
okay. So
alpines
all
or
right.
the
Well, let's take marine birds as a kind then that got off the ark. Okay,
sure.
just as an example, right? With the diversity that we see in marine birds, like from cormorants to ibises to ducks to all of these different birds, terns, albatross. You would need a very, very fast amount of diversification in order to get to that diverse range of organisms, right? You would have to have that. So, and that's in what, 6,000 years or so? What is it, 4,000 actually for the ark, off the ark? So in
Yeah, I think the
4,000
flood would have
years,
been 4,400 years ago, approximately.
right, 4,400. Excellent. So in order to get that diverse range, you would need incredible levels of mutation. You would need to have diversification ramped into overdrive. So on one hand, you need very fast mutation in order to reach the diversity of marine birds that you're talking about. But on
Hmm.
the other hand, you're saying they were more pure, so there was less mutation.
Sure.
There's a problem there.
Okay. But have we not seen in evidence of not just global catastrophes, but local ones, when like rainforests can come back in so fast? And I know that I'm looking at it in kind of a bigger picture, but looking at a rainforest as an organism, it comes back so fast and is so diverse in such a fast manner. I mean, if humanity ceased to exist, this whole planet would resume itself in a
Sure.
matter of a couple of decades.
Well, except for the
Oh,
animals that went extinct.
Well, it would
yeah.
happen so fast, and
Well,
the
we're
pressures
not
that we've
we're not
applied on the
really
environment.
talking about that.
Right.
Trees can be clonal as well. So we're not
Yeah.
really talking about sort of. So I understand what you're saying about one organism and it can come back fast, but when you're talking about trees, you're talking about something a bit different because they're trees. They can be clonal. They can produce there's a whole bunch of different trees, and I wouldn't look at a rainforest as one organism. Like, I know that people say, hey, if you look at it as a mega organism, yeah, you can kind of do that, but that's not how we look at a rainforest. Like, an organism would be a tree or a
Sure. Sure.
fern or a whatever. And usually, like in the case of Australian trees, they actually rely on fire. They have adapted to fires by sort of, it cracks their seeds and things like
Right.
that. They're actually benefit by fire. But what we're talking about is in the last 4,000 years, that it got down to a population of two, that somehow bred and adapted to all the different diverse forms of life that we see in these kinds, if you will. And I really dislike that term because it really is not, it's not classified very well, Mark. I'll tell
Sure.
you that it's not. But I'll use it anyway. Those kinds, and diversified greatly, but somehow came from two, but don't have any of the sort of the hallmarks of an inbred population like we see in other populations, like we see in cheetahs or humans, which had a bottleneck and got down to about, I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, Big, but I think it was about 6,000 members we got down to. And yeah, I know your story says that. I know your story says it got down to 8 people and, two of every kind of animal. It doesn't make sense genetically.
Well,
Something
not
else has to
necessarily
happen.
only two of every kind coming off the ark, because there Noah was told to keep 7 pairs of some kinds of birds and 7 pairs of other animals, making the distinction between clean and unclean. I can't quote it back verbatim. I haven't really studied this in a while, but
Mhm.
I would say that the argument for there weren't enough initial uh, pair, or just a single pair not being sufficient to replenish a population. But what if there's 7? Because the story goes that there were 8 humans, and we replenished the earth from there. There's really no way to tell how many people were on the earth prior to the flood, so we can't even say for sure that we've even reached the level of diversity that there was before the flood.
But Mark,
Yeah,
aren't you kind of saying that there's been so many mutations in this hyperspeciation, yet at the same time you're saying that those organisms were somehow purer? It's it contradicts itself.
yeah, that's what I said. Yeah.
I'm trying to wrap my head around that. I really am. I'm not gonna just like yell at you and say no way, no way. I really am
No,
genuinely
no, I
trying to
got you. I
understand
got you.
that.
Well, it's that so it's basically that the more diverse something is from something that it's related to. So if you have a Just say you've got two different types of seagull, and then you've got an albatross, right? The way that adaptation works and the way that organisms diversify is that the further it goes along, the more mutations it needs to change, right? So, for instance, a really good example of this is the brassica industry, right? So we're talking Brussels sprouts, cauliflower.
It's all from a mustard.
Yeah, all from the wild mustard plant kind of thing.
Sure.
So what you're talking about is when you're breeding these plants, you're basically looking for the ones that have mutated, right, that have more mutations bringing it further away that you want, and then selecting them and saying, yes, I want this one. So basically the way that change occurs in organisms is that the further it gets from the original, the more mutations have happened.
But is that how it works with say broccoli and the mustard seed line? Is it mutations that change it, or is it just the selection? You're selecting for this quality that you want, and eventually you come up with, asparagus or what have you.
Well, the things that change it is the mutations. The process that decides what will go on to the next generation is the selection process. So if you have a wild mustard and you select it for a bigger floret kind of thing, a bigger head or whatever, and then replant that instead of the original, it will be, and then keep doing that, keep selecting the larger flower, you will eventually get one with a big, large flower. The changes that you see, like just say one has a smaller flower, that's a mutation as well. The difference is that you're not selecting that one. So the mutations are random, but the selection process is not. You've determined what will survive into the next generation.
Okay, so I guess what I'm not understanding exactly is what would qualify as a mutation.
There's a lot of them, but really any change in the DNA structure of that organism. So you get substitution, where a different base pair code or a different section is put in there instead of the original, and that's sort of a spot mutation. You have substitution, where two different areas are switched for one another. It's an error in coding. You have transposition, where one section will be put somewhere else. You'll have omission, where it misses a section, and so it takes a chunk of the DNA. All of these are mutations and all have different effects. Some are unpredictable. We don't know what they would produce. We don't understand a lot of it. But what we do know is these occur all the time.
So, all right. So what is one of the, like broccoli, for example, came from a wild mustard plant. Is that correct? So if we start with a wild mustard plant and selected it and selected it and selected it down the line for these specific mutations, like the more floral, the more nutrient dense, would we be able to replicate the broccoli consistently?
What do you mean by replicate the broccoli consistently?
All right, so we look at the genetics of what we would agree on is a broccoli plant. We go to the grocery store, we buy broccoli, we take it to a genetic scientist, and they look at it through their microscopes or whatever magic they do to figure that stuff out. Would we be able to take the same wild mustard plant that line, or say we preserve like heirloom seeds, right? Okay. The original that broccoli came from, would we be able to consistently reproduce to where our end product is genetically identical to what was the original standard for broccoli?
I don't know. We probably would be able to get something approximating broccoli, whether it would be genetically identical, because you're talking about so many base pairs. Like even the simplest organism's DNA is incredibly complicated. So if you kept selecting, you would definitely get something that approximated broccoli, but I don't think it'd be genetically identical, because these mutations are random. What happens is random. We're just selecting the ones that come up how we wish them to be, or what we want out of them. So would the same random mutations occur again? I doubt it. Possibly you could, but you may need, in order to do that, the entire planet and maybe a few other planets covered in broccoli in order to do that. That it may be unreasonable to win
Or
that genetic
millions of years,
lottery.
right?
No, because we didn't start cultivating wild mustard millions of years ago.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
It's like, could we get chihuahuas again from wolves? And the answer is probably no. We couldn't get something that's exactly a chihuahua, but we could get something that was probably the same size as a chihuahua.
Right.
Yeah. And a lot of the same. So basically, a lot of the same chance mutations occur and are selected.
It's artificial selection.
Yeah, we would.
Well, not with broccoli. Not with broccoli.
Yeah, that was artificial selection.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. We chose the traits on that one. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I got that one backwards.
No, that's okay.
Mark, can I ask you a couple questions on human chromosome 2 fusion that creationists bring up? So we find the telomere, centromere calling cards all over the genome, the sequences. So why is the human chromosome 2 fusion site unique?
Well, it's the density, because telomeres essentially, they tell the cell when to curl up and die, essentially. So they get shorter and shorter. Usually the telomeres are thousands long, kind of thing, right? They're usually very, very, very long. And we do see these sequences, but not in the density of chromosome 2. So the sequence is 738, and nowhere else in the genetic sequence do we get the head-to-head repeat that is that long. It's the density that is the main factor. So it's essentially, it's because it has the length that is required to be a telomere.
So do we see these telomere fusions elsewhere in other species?
No, I'm not sure about that one. I don't think so, but we haven't mapped everything's DNA. Right, the Human Genome Project was a massive undertaking, and it mapped human DNA. I don't think we've even completed the map of the chimpanzee DNA.
It was done in 1960, wasn't the chimp chromosome published in 1960?
Well, that's a chromosome, right?
Okay, the genome, the total genome.
Right, the genome is the entire thing of however many chromosomes they have. Right, so the Human Genome Project was, let's map human DNA, like the entirety of human DNA, like all 24 chromosomes, kind of thing. But we haven't done that for all species because it's a huge undertaking.
From what I understand, it has happened in pigs and horses. So I'm kind of answering my own question.
Okay, look, that could well be true. I'm not 100% sure, but when you're sort of saying, hey, do we see a fusion in other species, I'm really not sure about that. I think that we haven't mapped all of them, but I'm not sure if we see fusion in other animals.
One more thing that they bring up is that there's a functional gene on the proposed fusion site.
Sure.
Indicating that it's not degenerate, I guess. I'm not sure what the point is there, but they do claim that because there's a functional gene on the proposed fusion site. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the important thing to remember is the same with ERVs. Mutation can happen anywhere along here. So if there is a telomere that has a benefit, it could be a mutation further along the line that has provided a benefit, and therefore would be replicated by that individual that succeeds in the population and then become fixed in the population. There's nothing unusual about that.
Do you think that people use the word mutation colloquially as some sort of a detrimental effect, as opposed to mutations are mostly um, near neutral, or else they can be even beneficial, but aren't most of
Yeah,
them? Yeah,
most of them are basically nearly neutral, or there are probably more detrimental ones, but they can be incredibly beneficial. So I maybe they do. I just, in science, when we say mutation, we're not saying, hey, it's this horrible thing that's happened. I think that people need to get that out of their mind, that a mutation usually is just neutral. It just doesn't do anything.
right, right. Why don't the detrimental mutations overwhelm the organism in comparison to the few beneficial mutations?
Because when they build up, usually that member of the population exits completely. So
They're not part of
they
the gene pool anymore.
correct. So if
They
they
are
have
dead.
they have nearly neutral mutations. If something comes along and that population heads towards sort of, it will pass a point where they're still competing against maybe another one that has a beneficial mutation that has an advantage. So out of the two, because they're competing, it is the one that has the benefit, and then the others just die. They just get removed. So if they have detrimental mutations that pass the point where they cannot survive against ones with a few beneficial mutations, they will no longer be competing. They will go extinct. And then they're not in the gene pool anymore. They're taken out.
Okay.
So
Thank you,
I've got
Mark.
a question.
Yeah.
So is in every species there's a huge variety of differences among different traits. Or is every trait that's different from one person to another considered a mutation? Like, for instance, I have green eyes. I think you have blue eyes. Would that be considered a mutation or just a trait that's inherent in our genes?
So some things are mutations, some are not. Some characteristics you'll definitely inherit. In fact, most you'll inherit from your parents, right?
Right.
Well, that's not a mutation. So
Okay.
mutations are novel. They're new things that have come into it. So
Sure.
if, just say, one of my ancestors, or just say my great grandfather was colorblind, for instance, and he, that had not been passed on to him by a ancestor, just a mutation made him colorblind. That would be a mutation.
Well, how
If
do
it's
you know it
passed on by,
wasn't passed on?
sometimes we don't.
Okay.
But we can look at, what was the, who were these people, what did they have, kind of thing. Like tetrachromia is a mutation. Is it tetrachromia? Yes. So what that is, and this is fascinating as a beneficial mutation. So this is one of the beneficial mutations that we're talking about. Tetrachromia is a mutation in women specifically, because the mutation happens in the Y chromosome, which men obviously don't have. So tetrachromia gives an extra rod to a woman's eye, so they can actually see way more colors than anybody else. They can perceive the color spectrum way better than anybody without that mutation. They have a
Sure.
huge advantage where they have to distinguish color. And that is a mutation when it occurs. I don't believe that's passed on by parents, or it may not be passed on by parents, but it is a mutation that occurs.
Okay. So and we were talking about the mustard plant. It's actually the wild cabbage that produces like the cauliflower and the
No,
broccoli.
wrong. Second X chromosome is where it appears. Sorry, I just thought about that. Second X chromosome. Y is obviously men. That's terrible. I'm sorry.
Well,
I
you
don't know
better
what I
tread
was.
lightly on there only being two genders. I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. But
Look, we
going
can
back,
discuss that as well. I'm more than happy to discuss that as well, because I have opinions about that. So yeah, and I
well,
have some facts to back me up as well. So I'm more than happy to discuss that as well.
look, I have not a vagina. I have a penis, so that tells me I'm
Well,
male.
that
And
tells
I
your
mean,
sex. It doesn't
yeah,
tell
sure.
your gender.
Or my gender identity. I mean, I identify with my sex. So Fair
That's
enough,
fine.
I guess.
That's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah, that's perfectly fine if you do so. I'm just saying that gender, like the way that we distinguish gender, is not. I don't pull down your pants, Mark, and look at what you're hauling around.
Of course,
I mean,
right.
that isn't how we distinguish that, and I don't look at your chromosomes either. Gender identity is something a bit different. So
Yeah,
it tells
it's
your
more
sex,
in
sure.
that's more in a psychological realm.
Well,
Wouldn't
a
you say?
social construct realm.
Social
It's a social
construct, yeah.
construct. So women wear dresses is a social construct. There's nothing biologically that says that. There's
Sure.
no that has to be a social. It has to be.
Right. I would totally agree with that. But going back to the artificial selections, why does it necessarily have to be a mutation? If you start off with a wild cabbage and you
Mhm.
know you can get broccoli because you've already done it before, why does it necessarily have to be a mutation? And why isn't it just a trait that the
Okay.
the the offspring, the seedlings of this broccoli, and you just select the traits? Why does it have to be a mutation?
Okay.
That's why I
Well,
was asking is like is every difference in our traits a mutation? Because from my understanding, to with breeding animals and the artificial selection process for getting different fruits and vegetables, it's not necessarily that there's a what's the word, mutation, but it could be just that, hey, we expect this trait to be there, so we're just going to pick this trait until we get what we want.
right. So do you know the way alleles work?
No.
Okay. So when I'll try to break this down simply. So when you get sort of two sides of so each germline, each sperm or egg is half of the genetic sequence, right? You give
Okay.
out half the genetic sequence from your father and half from your mother, right?
Right.
Right. So it'll pick one of those two inherited from your mother and your father, right? Like it'll just go down, and there's some other factors like whether something is dominant or recessive and things like that. But
Yeah.
essentially you'll be a blend of the two genetic sequences of your mother and father, right?
Of course.
Right. So you acknowledge that sometimes something you will have a trait that isn't from your mother or your father, right?
Maybe, sure. I mean, well, yeah, of course. My mom has blue eyes, my dad has brown eyes, and I have hazel green
Well,
eyes.
eyes are a bit different. We'll put that to one side because eye color is a blending of the two. But just say you have
Okay.
like you have a blood condition or something that didn't
Okay.
come from your mother or your father, right? So really what I'm asking, if you get variation that isn't in your mother and it isn't in your father and it isn't the two combined together like eye color, what's your proposal of where it came from?
Could it have been recessive and
Well,
somehow
no, that didn't come from your mother or your father. So the way that traits occur is recessive ones have a 1/4 chance of being selected in the process, and dominant have a 3/4 chance. But your mother or your father will possess those traits, kind of
right?
thing. So we know that they didn't come from the ancestors. It is a novel trait that is being expressed. Like, where
Okay.
did it come from?
I no idea. I can't answer that
Right.
because I don't
And
know.
and Well, we have an answer. It's mutation. So
Okay.
so like the duplication of a sequence, or the omission of a sequence, or the transposition, like it accidentally puts a sequence somewhere else. That's where we're explaining it comes from. These other traits that are completely new, not from your mother and father, come from. And if we select for them and keep breeding them, we will end up with something completely different. Because every time we're doing that, we're saying, hey, there's this new sequence that we haven't seen before. We're going to keep breeding that one. And so it gets reinforced and reinforced and reinforced.
Okay. So
Because
where
that's
is
in the
oh,
wild, right? Like you're trying to get Brussels sprouts, right? So that wouldn't happen in the wild to the wild mustard. There's no reason why a Brussels sprout, a mustard plant with big seeds or big flowers would survive better in the wild.
well, it's already reached its peak survivability from wherever it came from for the
Well, there's
environment
no
that it's in.
such thing. there's no such thing as peak survivability, because the environment's always changing. It's
True.
always, everything is always changing. There's no peak, there's no goal, there's no limit. It's just how organisms adapt to the world around them, and the world around them always changes. It gets hotter, it gets colder. The environment changes. Mountains sort of fall. We're always changing. But it wouldn't select for the things that we'd select for,
Right.
there may be no reason why it would select for, the taste, for instance. Let's go with an easy one. It tastes good to humans is not something a wild, mustard plant would select as being a beneficial trait for survival. But
It'd
we've
be a
obviously
horrible trait
selected it.
for its survival.
Right, because it's probably putting resources into things that it doesn't need. It's just,
Well, and there'd be hungry humans coming around to pluck them up as soon as they find them.
Right. But, stuff like it. And the banana is a fantastic example. We've bred that to a point where it resembles almost nothing like it did originally. Like,
Right.
if you've ever seen a plantain, it is completely different than a banana. But we have bred that, by selecting these weird plantains that came up, these sort of weird ones that have mutations, and kept breeding those ones while getting rid of the other ones until, we have bananas and we have plantains.
Yeah.
Hello,
We got
Mark.
Deviant Outcast
Hello.
here. And Christian
Deviant
Pike.
and Christian.
You don't
Thanks
know this
for
is me.
entertaining my questions, Mark. I do appreciate it.
Oh, no problem at all. No problem. And I get that, this is the current scientific understanding. And I get that you, you're obviously a man of faith and you believe something different. It's just, I can't, like, the science sort of disagrees with what you're saying happened. Like this idea that there was 7 animals off the ark. I get that that's your religion, but I don't understand how that squares with science, because that is something that just doesn't square with the science, Mark. I'm sorry, mate. It just
There's
doesn't.
a lot of things in scripture that don't necessarily square with science, but we call them miracles.
I'll agree to that. Yeah.
Jesus healing the blind and coming alive from the dead, that science can't explain that. Those are miraculous things. I'd say that the Bible's full of things that science doesn't agree with, but that's not the purpose of science. The purpose of science is to explore the natural world and natural phenomenon and find answers for why these things necessarily are the way they are. And that's even described in Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 13. It says, and this is Solomon, he says, "And I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven, this burdensome task God has given to the sons of man, by which they may be exercised." So when you think of this concept of exercise, it's something you do practice consistently, or it's kind of pointless. If you don't go to the gym and work out, you're not going to build muscle. If you don't study, you're not going to make good grades. You have to consistently do this exercise. And I think that's a really good picture of what we're doing, having conversations like this, where we're exercising our thoughts, our views, our opinions. And I'm not trying to disprove you by any means. I just want to understand better where you're coming from, because what I believe the Bible teaches is that the heavens and the earth were created with apparent age, just like Adam was not born, but made an adult from the first day of his creation on day 6. And just like Eve was made as an adult on her first day of existence, I believe the entirety of creation was made that way, with the appearance of age. And I think that's why, especially in the Ecclesiastes, it's supposed to be a challenge. We're supposed to be, trying to figure this out. It's not supposed to just make sense at face value. And I think that I absolutely love hearing lectures like this or presentations where you go in depth and you're not just getting screamed at and talked over, because I want to hear this stuff.
Well, I know people think I'm scary and that I'm going to attack them, but I'm really not. Like I think that they've seen my debates, and like debates are a bit of a different beast than discussions. I'm really They're more confrontational, where I'm putting up my understanding and my ideas against somebody else's. So I'm a bit more rambunctious in those situations. But this is apparently creation versus evolution. So maybe we should talk about creation. And I do have a problem with the idea that it was created with age, because then you can get into last Thursdayism, which means that you could believe that the world was created last Thursday and just made to look like it's, X amount of years old, that we can't tell if
hypothesis.
Right, or we can't tell if it was created 1 second ago and we've just been created with all the memories that we've had throughout our entire life, but really we're just 1 second old. I think that the same problem occurs to that. That if you want to say that, then you really have to look at, you don't then have any kind of consistent justification for anything besides 1 second in the past. I think if you're being intellectually honest, you'd have to say, well, then you don't know when the earth was created, because it could have just been created a second ago with all your memories of the Bible and all the stuff that had happened to you, and you just don't know.
Well, you could say it could be but I'm presenting what Scripture says, and it answers that. It says, in the beginning, God did this, and it gives a timeline of events from, the birth of
why
first children
would we
to.
believe Scripture? What's the justification? Why do you believe Scripture is inerrant?
Why not? Why not believe it's inerrant?
Well, it seems to clash with, as you said, a lot of scientific principles. So
I think it has to do with
when we talk about where I'm grounding my understanding of reality, it's really in empiricism, which is the idea that your senses are the best way to evaluate the world around you. I don't think anybody really disagrees with that.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, we've all got to cross the road and stuff, right? But but also that science is the most reliable way to find out, the most reliable evidence. Basically, it has given us a better understanding into the world than anything else in history. So I kind of I see the Bible as a book, but I don't see it as inerrant, and I'm wondering what makes it inerrant.
Well, I think the real question is presuppositions. I come from faith, and I presuppose that the Bible is true. I can't paint faith red, put it in a box, tie it up, and ship it to Australia to show you what it is. But it's something that exists. It's something that I have, and because
We
of
have
that faith,
Bibles here.
I well. I said faith, not a Bible. Like my faith, it's
Oh,
an
okay,
intangible
gotcha.
thing. My
Sorry,
belief,
my apologies.
not a
Yep.
Bible. Of course, I could send you a Bible,
Yep.
but my faith dictates that I presuppose that Scripture is true. And I'm not trying, like I said, I'm not trying to disprove anything that you're saying, but I am trying to give an answer for what the Bible says. And if you presuppose that the Bible is true and that God created it in the beginning, and then still going along with it's true, you do have a process of time to where you would have to drop your presupposition to even ask, well, what if it was just created 2 seconds ago? Well, that's just not what God said. And if you presuppose that what God said in the Bible is true, then that's kind of an absurd question to even ask. I understand why you would ask it, and I totally understand the concept of last Thursdayism, and that's why I brought up also the oh crap, it slipped my tongue. Whatever the other theory. I understand them, but I just don't think it's necessarily a fair question to ask when you're trying to get answers for what the Bible says.
I think Deviant has a question for Mark. Is that right, Deviant?
Well, I just
for everyone, so I didn't want to interrupt because it has to do
I just
with
want to address that for 1 second, just 1 second to address that. And I think that yeah, everybody has presuppositions. Everybody does. It's impossible to avoid. But when you're talking about a presupposition that God, it's inerrant and that it can't be wrong, epistemologically, or sort of just when you try to justify things to yourself, it doesn't make you right. All it does is just convince you can't be wrong. And that's the problem I've had with faith in sort of these circles, that it's not really showing you that you're right or that you are justified. It's just convincing you. Like, you could do that, what the process you've described, I could do with Islam or Judaism or Buddhism, or even that fairies live in my backyard. I could do it with literally anything, and it doesn't actually get to why I am right about that presupposition. Or it's a presupposition, it doesn't need to be justified, but like there is no reason why anybody else who hasn't made that presupposition would adhere to that.
Well,
It's basically like,
I'm not presupposing that I'm right. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. I could be wrong. I could be misinterpreting. I could be misunderstanding. I mean, our Bible is thousands of years old, and it's been translated over languages that I don't speak into dialects that I don't speak. I could very well be misrepresenting or misinterpreting, but I'm not presupposing that I'm right. I'm presupposing that the scripture's right. And when you
yeah.
do that, I just don't see, well, oh, that's last Thursdayism as an appropriate response to, well, in the beginning, then you've got the process of time, and here we are. I don't think it's valid if you presuppose the biblical truth, the biblical narrative of in the beginning God created it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to say right here in this moment, well, what if it was really all just done 2 seconds ago? Because you would have to drop that presupposition. And I'm prepared to do that. I can drop the
Well,
presupposition to engage in an honest
yeah,
discussion.
I'm not talking about last Thursday. What I'm saying is that I could do the same with, say, Lord of the Rings, for instance.
Sure.
I could presuppose that's an inerrant text that's absolutely correct. But
Sure.
the problem is that it doesn't actually, a presupposition is never a justification. It's only just an assumption. And a presupposition doesn't, like, always with a presupposition, you have to keep in mind that that presupposition could be completely wrong because it's
Right.
unjustified.
Right.
But it seems like what you're sort of saying is, I presuppose it, so it must be right. And it's in fact the opposite. A presupposition means that you haven't justified it in any way.
I'm really trying not to say that, and if I have led you to believe that's what I'm saying, I apologize. I do take the presupposition that the Bible's true. I'm not saying that it can't be falsified, but what I would say to that is, well, maybe what I'm interpreting is untrue, and if it can be proven that, demonstrated that this is impossible, this whole Bible story, then yeah, sure, whatever, it's what it is. I would still live my life by the principles I've learned from Christianity, from my
Sure.
upbringing, and from the culture I live in, because it's a moral life that I try to ascribe to.
Sure, I don't have a problem with that. That's the thing. Like, the atheists don't really have a problem with people believing in what they believe and living, as you say, a moral life. That's not the problem. It's really that we get told things that contravene our best understandings of reality, and that's, I think, where the bone of contention is. Like, if someone wants to be a Christian and go and pray and do all of that stuff, no problem at all. That's their faith, that's their belief. I've got no problem with that. It's when people start to say, hey, the earth is 6,000 years old, that's the bone of contention. Because as far as we know, by our best scientific understanding, that is factually untrue. So that's where the
Sure.
contention lies. Or if somebody says, hey, you've got to do X, Y, and Z kind of thing, you've got to,
You said it. You said Zed. I knew it. It was coming.
no, you caught me. You caught me. I'm an old school English user. Yeah. Thanks, England. But yeah, that's where the bone of contention is, that I have to live in a certain way because other people have this belief in something that they haven't justified. That's the problem.
Sure.
That I don't see why I should adhere to that. So yeah, don't get me wrong. No problem with belief. No problem that you have faith. It's just, I guess that what I'm getting across to you is that it's not a very good way to determine what is correct, what is actually true, and what is not. If you don't really care what is true and what is false, then by all means, like, that's fine. But really, I'm interested. I'm talking about myself here. I'm interested in what is true and what is not true, first and foremost. And sort of presuppositions are never a good way to find out what's true, because they don't actually establish what's true. They're a presupposition. You just assume they're true,
Right,
regardless
but
of
like
whether they are.
like you said, we all have them and we can't avoid them. But
Can I
yeah,
jump in?
sure, please.
Because I understand what. How am I going to be able to address
Mark versus Mark? Mark versus Mark.
That made me very giddy and happy when I come in and I realize that when I shout Mark, no one's gonna know who I'm speaking
It's for
about.
both of us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Strong name. I mean, what can you say?
True.
You know what it means?
But
Mighty
it means,
warrior.
No, not exactly.
It means an uppity.
Well, that's what I was told.
It's Marcus, shortened for Marcus, which was a Roman name meaning sanctified to Mars, the god of war.
Oh, well, yeah, mighty warrior, sanctified, god of war. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But
Slightly different interpretation, but yeah.
It's a pagan name. It's not a Christian name.
What?
It's fine with me. Whose name isn't pagan?
Right. Mine.
Sorry, Deviant, go for it. What
Just as a point, but my name isn't pagan.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Reid. Now I'm going to call you Reid. Otherwise, I will get each time I'm trying to. What am I going to call?
My little brother's middle name is Reid.
Oh my goodness!
Sorry.
Let Deviant get her question out.
Yeah. Let's.
Yeah.
I'll
The first thing, what I was going to say to the other Mark. I'm a nutcase. I'm not. I have PTSD and ADHD, so I easily get sidetracked and forget things, and sometimes don't really follow at all. Just a little warning. Which is why I have to ask, what were you saying before just before I asked to jump in? Because that was what you said there was what I was going to tag on to. What was the subject you were talking about? You were talking about
ARV.
Sorry?
Lots of stuff.
Endogenous retroviruses?
No.
Evolution?
No.
Selective breeding?
No.
Broccoli?
Right before now, you were talking about
apparent age.
Apparent age? Yeah, maybe.
That was one thing that I was going to, but this was.
We covered a lot.
I know, but this was right before I said, "Can I jump in?" I mean, like less than 5 minutes ago.
Can anybody rewind the tape? I don't know. I've got the ADHD real bad myself.
Yeah, I know.
Same here.
Yeah, that's why I feel safe saying those kind of things, because I know I'm with fellow nutcases, and I love it.
Do you want to think about it, Deviant, and we'll see if Christian's got a comment?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't mute.
I've been trying to think of a comment. Honestly, I've been sitting here and I'm like, I'm going to say something smart. I'm jumping in, but I can't think of anything. So I'm just listening.
I've had so much to say, and I've forgotten it all. You spoke.
That's okay. I mean, I'm sure it'll come up. I promise I won't go on if you talk out again, because I realized we kind of, like, Mark and I were in the middle of it, like really going back and forward. So we did sort of sideline you, and I do apologize for that, Deviant. I really want to give you some time to say what you need to say. But I'd love to talk to Christian, because I want to go at Christian. Because
I'm going to take this opportunity to back out, because I've got an injured jaw, and the more I talk, the more it hurts.
No, don't go,
Mark.
I'll still be listening.
Good job, Mark. Great conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, you
Mark.
don't have to. Okay, you can stay there if you want. I mean,
No, I'm
you're
still
not.
gonna listen. I'm still gonna listen, but I'm gonna either go
Okay.
backstage or something because I gotta stop talking. My jaw's getting sore.
Okay.
You take
No
care of
worries.
your
Well, it was
jaw.
great to talk to you, Mark. It really
I'll
was.
just
It was
return to
good.
the chat. That's what I'll do. But yeah,
Thank
I
you,
really
Mark.
appreciate it. That was a great discussion. I actually learned a lot, and I like to leave discussions having learned something. So I do appreciate that. And
My
Logan,
pleasure.
thanks for having us on, and thank you everybody for being you. Y'all are great.
See you, Mark.
Thank
Keep
you,
that chat
Mark.
straight.
You're the
I'll
best.
do it.
Thanks,
guy.
Mark.
Yeah, so Christian, you got me thinking about when we're having that conversation with Dustin about faith kind of thing and how you described faith as being oxymoronic. That really got me thinking.
Yeah.
So for me, and I'd love to know how sort of you look at it, but for me, when you said sort of, well, it's oxymoronic, when I sat and thought about it, I thought, as a reason for believing something, that's even worse than no reason. You're sort of talking about a paradox. It's like, well, who should I look to validate my parking? And someone says, a married bachelor. So just for background, Christian sort of said faith is, what did you say? It was the evidences, things unseen?
Yeah, I remember this conversation very well, and I do actually believe that this is the very reason that it's worded this way. The Apostle Paul wrote in one of his letters, it may have been Romans, I can't remember, but he wrote in one of his letters, he said, faith is the evidence of things hoped for, or I'm sorry, the substance of things hoped for,
Yes,
the evidence of things not seen. And of course, both of those are oxymoronic statements, which I think he did intentionally. And if you read in the context of the chapter, it is my belief that he was trying to let the people understand that real faith in God is something that is disassociated from material reality. He was letting them know that there's a gulf there between our natural understanding and our spiritual inclinations that cannot be bridged through human conscience. I don't know if that's the right terminology, but you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but what you're talking about is something paradoxical, like logically
Yes.
exclusionary, essentially,
Yes.
like a married bachelor.
Yes.
So it's kind of, for me, that means that not only does faith sort of, you can't possibly the reason for believing, if reasons for believing is faith, then it's something that cannot logically exist.
Well, you just hit the nail on the head right there when you worded it
Right.
that way, which I believe is what Paul was pointing out when you said reason for believing. I understand faith probably a bit differently than most people, as far as at least most people I've talked to about this. My belief is that what Paul meant by that passage was that you either have faith or you don't have faith, and it has nothing to do with what you decide to have. He was saying that it exists within a person, exclusive of their own decision making. Free will is an illusion in the Bible, so to speak. Either a person has faith in God and cannot explain why they have it, or they don't have it and cannot explain why they don't have it.
I don't think most people would think that free will is an illusion in the Bible, Ed. I think most Christians would disagree with that sentiment.
Probably.
From the ones that I've met.
They probably would.
I guess my point is that if faith is just something that you have without being able to be quantified, or without being able to be explained, it's this sort of nebulous property that you just have. Why would you take faith in a God over faith in anything else? Like, if I have faith there's gremlins in my computer, or I have faith there's sort of people outside my window, or that a giant created the world.
Well, it goes back to that thing of taking it. You don't have faith that there are gremlins in your computer. You're reintroducing this idea of it being a choice. And that's probably where I differ from most people. I think that what the apostle was saying was either you have this inherently or you don't have this inherently, that it's not a choice.
Well, why wouldn't he be saying, sorry, Davian, go for
it. Yeah. It's I would say that it isn't a choice. I mean, I know many, especially former Christians, who are now atheists, many of them say they wish they could believe, but
Right.
they can't, and you can't, at least, and I don't know any other belief system that would grant that just pretending would somehow fool God or the gods. Well,
Right.
the
Either you have it
Egyptians,
or you don't, and you should be honest with yourself. Right.
right?
Well, it's doxastism. I think I can never pronounce that word. So I am a follower of involuntary doxasticism, which
Okay.
that
Yeah.
pertains
Oh, sorry.
to
I've never
whether
heard
you can.
doxastic. Doc.
Yeah, it pertains to whether you actually can choose your beliefs or not. Doxastic. It's DOXASTIC. Doxastic. So.
Okay.
I think it's involuntary. I think you can't choose to believe or not choose to
Right.
believe,
Right.
but I think you're convinced of things. I think that you can even convince yourself, kind of thing. But it's you can't just say, "Well, I choose to believe in a God." And some people say that you can. Some people disagree. But I think that when we do epistemology or the justification of why we believe something, faith is a really bad way to believe something or know something is true. I think that it is a terrible, or what you've described as a terrible way to be correct or incorrect. And that's, you maybe be happy, sort of not having a justified reason for believing, but I do want to try to justify what I believe so I have a better chance of believing that which is true and not believing that which is false.
Let me give you an example. I do think that it is, when me and you had our talks on your channel, a lot of times there was defining of terms and we would identify the distinctions of how things are used contextually. Well, this is sort of one of those because I'll give you an example. You know me well enough to know that I am a huge fan of biology. I enjoy learning about biology. I'm not a scientist, but I'm a wannabe student of it.
Oh, same, yeah.
And so I read a bunch of books. I'm a huge Richard Dawkins fan, things like that, of course, because he's just a sort of a communicator for people like me. And everything in the natural world, I mean, to the nth degree, points toward general common ancestry. Everything that I have read or learned, or the people that I look up to in the related fields have spoken about, would direct one to believe in just general common ancestry, that all living organisms share a common ancestor. So I see with all of my understanding that is the logical conclusion with the data that we have.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe there are independently created kinds that are not related, though that flies in the face of what I clearly see. But I can't help the fact that I believe it. My intellect would believe this other thing if it were able to. It is a predisposition.
Yeah, and I actually have, maybe not to the degree that you do, Christian, or obviously not, because you actually have dedicated yourself to a given belief system. But I can say, even though I am 100% an atheist, I am agnostic because I realize that I am far from the one person on earth that knows the much. Just listen to me, you figure it out yourself. The most. So I realized that there could be things that we don't know about, but so far I see no reason to adapt my life to one particular belief system, because I don't see them as, even if there were somehow a kernel of truth, they have through time, if that's the case, then through time they have been so corrupted and into something that's no longer, they have evolved, but they haven't evolved the way natural evolution takes place. They have more been corrupted. But I still have these kind of almost childlike fantasy dreams. I like to play in my head, see things. I mean, I have gnomes living in my apartment. No one knows. Now you do, but and no, I
suspected
don't
as
believe
much.
in gnomes. But yes, I have gnomes in my apartment. Of course, I do.
Okay.
So I think if I went into, I'm somewhere along the line, I've made a conscious decision or semi-conscious decision to not sow my life to the belief in real goblins, because if I did that, I would start to ascribe all the little sounds in my apartment to, oh, that's the goblins. And sooner or later, especially with me who spends so much time with just myself, I would believe it. And when do I then start to wander into the land of loony?
It's a reasonable point.
Yeah, so this is an argument, sort of reductio ad absurdum, that if faith can justify anything, especially if those goblins are capable of anything, it means anything that happens in your apartment could be put on the goblins. Every sound, every whisper, every anything at all can be put on the if they're capable of anything.
Exactly.
And you know, I'm sorry, I do kind of see God the same way, that if a God is capable of anything and has infinite power, that anything can be attributed to them. There's nothing that can't back up that idea, because everything is evidence at that point.
Exactly.
And yeah, that's a problem. I agree, Deviant. I really do.
Good. No, that means I also made sense. I'm always cautious. I never know when I do.
Just because I
also
agree
have
with it doesn't mean
goblins.
it makes sense.
But at least if you understand the words, and yeah.
I also have goblins in my apartment, Davey. Don't feel bad. It's a common thing, really.
Do you
Are you
have them
talking
in
about
your
your
head too? Because I have those in, I think, or it's me. It could be me.
So my name is now Space Honky, thanks to missing mods. I don't know if you can understand that part. But
nice. Well, and you can sort of say, oh, but you know, nobody would believe things that absurd. But you know, again, Bigfoot Jesus. You know, there are people that believe in absolutely absurd stuff, and their justification could easily be exactly the same as yours, Christian. So
sure.
The question then comes to me is, why should I believe what you say on your justification of faith when there's other people who are saying contradictory things, and they have the same justification?
Well, I don't think you can. That's the interesting thing. The distinction I was making about the word as it's being used here is the Great Commission, what we call the Great Commission when it was given, which was the commandment that the Lord gave to his disciples that they should fulfill after the day of Pentecost, after they had tarried at Jerusalem. And what he told them was, go preach, and it records this. I think it's in Mark worded this way because it's worded differently in different accounts, but he says, preach this gospel to every creature. They that believe shall be saved, and they that believe not shall be damned. Well, I understand that to mean that when this is brought to the attention of certain people, they will find within themselves that they believe it, and that other people will not find that within themselves, and that the ones who believe it are God's children and the other ones are not. So it's not a choice.
But that also,
yes, but that's yeah.
That kind of
I get.
contradicts the idea that, I mean, sure, I guess God will love his own people best, but it's also kind of racist because he made everyone. So why does he like some more than others? And I mean, I'm not a believer, so according to that system, because I assume I will now assume that faith is kind of the hinge pin upon which salvation or damnation hangs?
Well, that's a big subject, to be honest. That kind of opens up an entirely new field of theology.
Yeah,
but
that
I
might
know.
there is a crux there in the scriptures of the ability for one to believe the gospel from their heart or the inability to do that.
Because if that's the case, but what I'm kind of hinting at is, to me, when I hear you speak, Christian,
Mhm.
I hear, first of all, I hear someone who has obviously thought through, just like with Mark, original Mark. Can I say that? Is that rude?
Is that original Mark?
If I say my Mark, is that possessive of me?
Which Mark is the true
You could
Mark
just
is the
use both their
question.
names, Mark Reid or Mark Stoney.
Yeah, thank you, BBM.
That's true.
Mark
I don't mind
Stoney.
being called Reid. Reid is fine. I'm fine with that.
Okay, good. Someone who is very comfortable in their belief and have thought it through. None of you are the type of believer who has just allowed yourself to be kind of emerged into this bath of Kent Hovind, for instance, just because
Sure.
I had to say his name.
No,
and
I
then
understand.
just regurgitate and spits out exactly those same talking points and same beliefs. You have looked into the subject. You have found your way. But
Yeah,
to me,
I mean,
even though
go ahead.
a lot of it sounds, yeah, that's beautiful and that's nice, but then I come up against other parts of the Bible, historical facts about the writings of the Bible, all sorts of things, and suddenly I realize the things I believe or find nice or good or positive that the Bible communicates, those are beliefs that I can have. Those basically boil down to be a good person, and if you're not, you're most likely going to suffer for it, and it's on you because you have acted like an a-hål. Ett rövhål helt enkelt.
Well, we're kind of going off subject into morality.
Yeah, I know.
As well,
I'm sorry.
incredibly complicated. No, that's fine. That's fine. I get what you're saying. And I kind of agree that you're only going to be able to take actions in the world if you have a correct understanding of what is true and what is not.
Yes.
I think I agree with Matt Delahunty when he says that if you don't know and you can't sort of even justify to yourself what is true and what is false in reality, then the actions that you take are not going to be consistent with the reality that is there. It's why that, people that do have a distorted view of reality, like schizophrenics and stuff, so often they end up taking actions that are detrimental to both themselves and other people. And I do believe this, that the only way you're going to take the best actions is if you have the best understanding of what is real. So that's why I do try to justify as much as possible empirically what is real and what is not, because that is the best way to find out what is real and what isn't real. I mean, I had a lot of beliefs in the past that were not validated. I believed that in astrology and psychic stuff and things like that. That as I sort of learnt more about critical thinking, I just could not justify them. It seems to me, and I'm not trying to offend you, Christian, it just seems to me that sort of just saying, well, I'm going to believe that because I have to, is sort of just doubling down on the unjustified belief, and I can't do that.
No, it's not offensive to me. No, it's one of the reasons probably that I feel so strongly about predestination like I do. There's been many discussions among these sort of connected channels on the subjects of Calvinism and Arminianism and things like that, and it's one of those theological subjects that gets beat till it's a dead horse constantly. But I probably hold the most extreme possible views in the direction of predetermined things. And if I could find a more radical version than what I currently have, I would switch to that, because I just believe that the way that the scripture teaches that free will is just an utter illusion and that things are all predetermined. And so my point in saying that is I really don't feel that I chose to believe in the scriptures. And in fact, I'm a bit of an intellectual by nature, and much of my personality strives against belief in the scriptures. But yet I find that there is something in me that just believes it anyways. Like the same way that I believe the sun's going to come up in the morning with that same degree of confidence, I believe the eastern sky is going to roll back one day. There is no difference in my mind. And it certainly isn't a choice I make, because one of those I could justify through the natural process that we use, and the other one I cannot. But yet my confidence in them is the same, and arguably greater in the supernatural one.
But you do understand, at least intellectually, that a person like Deviant Outcast said, a person who lives in their apartment, who believes that gnomes are the cause of all of the sounds in their apartment, they could say exactly the same thing.
Sure.
And, they could be completely wrong and, should not, in order for their own well-being and the well-being of people around them, should probably not believe that.
Well, I just don't think it's a choice. Maybe we're using the word belief differently, because I almost live my life like an avatar. I know the things that you have to do in life, working, paying bills, whatever, but none of that's very interesting to me. That's just sort of something I do because I have to. The part of life that is interesting to me is the ethereal part, the part that you can't put your hands on. The part that I refer to as part of my faith, part of my predisposition that I discovered within myself when I came in contact with the gospel.
Okay. But, somebody who believes in the gnomes can say the same. They're interested in the, gnomish parts of reality. And
I'm sure that there may be somebody out there who is in that position. I haven't met them.
Look, I've met some pretty wacky people. And the point. Sorry.
Bubblegum gun guy.
Bubblegum gun. Yeah, he believes in gnomes. He believes that gnomes do all of these things. Don't even ask. I really don't want to talk about Bubblegum. He is one of the craziest people I've met.
No.
You're absolutely
10
right.
stress signs immediately turn on in Mark when you said that.
Look, he thinks that dogs didn't come from wolves. He thinks that gnomes exist. He like the craziness level is completely off the charts. But yeah, like you can sort of say that, but also I see Bubblegum as being like, he seems sort of almost dangerous, like he has dangerous beliefs kind of thing, including that humans were created separately, so black people and white people were created separately kind of thing. So
I've heard that one a lot. I live in Georgia, Mark, so I've heard that one.
Right. So that's something that I think is a dangerous belief, when you're sort of saying, hey, that isn't part of my own species or my own group, or, that's something else is dangerous kind of thing. So and what I'm saying is some of these beliefs can be dangerous, especially when you're looking at what's happening to the LGBTQI plus sort of people at the moment, and sort of some of the rhetoric coming out from the Christians on what God thinks about these people. It's downright dangerous. And so really what I'm saying is that the only way we can get to a place where we are taking the best actions to not be dangerous is to have an understanding of what is real and what is not real. And if that justification is, well, I have to believe this because I have faith, the person, Bubblegum Gun with the gnomes can believe that too based upon that justification. I don't think it's sufficient. I think that it is just a excuse to keep believing what you believe with no justification whatsoever.
I understand what you're saying, and certainly, at least for the most part, I agree with it. It really is this line in the sand about what we mean by belief, because I believe that this house code is fuzzy because it feels fuzzy. You know what I mean? That's a justified belief. I'm feeling it. It's fuzzy. Therefore, I determine that it's made of fuzzy materials. It's not like that. I'm just using the same words to describe it because words like faith and belief are used interchangeably in this way. I wish there was another word, but it's not like that. It's something that you have this assurance of that you don't know why you have the assurance. It's not a choice that you make.
Well, I think a belief is a mental state that something, it's the mental state that embodied a stance that something is true, or a proposition is true. So in this case, we're talking about evolution versus creationism. So we're saying, is evolution true? And my belief would be, yes, that is true. So that proposition does hold a true value.
Right.
And so that would be my definition of belief, as opposed to do I believe in a God? Like, so does the proposition would be, does a God exist? And I would say, no, I think that proposition is false. So I don't believe in a God.
Right. That's the fuzzy house coat kind of faith.
What do you mean fuzzy? I don't know what
Well,
you mean.
what I mean is that you're reaching that by the same way that I reached the conclusion that the house code is fuzzy, because that's what everything is telling me about the house code.
Well, it doesn't get into why you believe it. That's the thing. Belief is simply that position, right? That you're saying, hey, that is true. So I'm not talking about faith, because then you start to get, well, why do you believe it? And that's epistemology, right? Why do you believe that is your stance on that is, this is true? And I think people believe stuff even though they don't want to. I think that, you find your wife cheating on you and you don't want to believe it, but you have to believe it. But it's independent of the reasons why you believe it. Like maybe you caught them in the act or something, right? Maybe you came in and caught them in the act. At that point, you have to believe, even though you don't want to, because the epistemology is sufficient in order for that to be belief to be there.
Correct.
You have to believe it, right? So when I'm talking about belief, I'm not talking about the reasons for belief. But it seems like the reasons for your belief is the faith. So,
well, that's why I say there's a difference in faith and belief, as the word faith was used in the passages that we're considering here. When he is speaking of faith in those passages, he is speaking of a person who, having come in contact with this message, found that within themselves there was an agreement with it. That once they came to the conscious knowledge of it, that it made sense to them and that they accepted it, and something about it felt true in their heart. So he's basically dividing, for lack of a better term, the sheep from the goats. Those who, when they come in contact with it, have the ability to believe it, and those who do not have that ability. So it's something that's dormant in there until it's activated.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is, when you look at epistemology and how we justify our belief, that the person with the gnome thing is doing that as well. They're saying,
I don't know if I agree with that. I understand the point you're trying to make.
Well, I mean, you don't know what they feel. They could easily do exactly the same.
No, it's
thing.
Certainly possible. Yes.
Right. So, and I mean, I know you can say, hey, it's different for this thing, but when you look
I'm
at
just
it
saying there's a
out,
difference in something that's possible and something that we believe is. I agree that it's possible.
Right. But I mean, presumably other religions do exactly the same thing. People come into contact with the message and have this hope in their heart, and they subscribe to Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism or whatever religion.
No, yeah, I'm sure that that's true. I don't know. I guess I just think of the gnomes thing as being one of those intentionally radical examples.
Well,
I shouldn't have mentioned the gnome.
No, it's absolutely true, because when we're looking at epistemology, we're looking at, why do I believe these things? I have these beliefs. What is it that has convinced me that this is in fact true? How do I get down to having my beliefs and supporting them as much as I can. That's what it's all about. Because we all believe things that have been incorrect, that haven't squared away with reality.
Sure.
We've all believed things that has been detrimental because it hasn't squared away with reality.
Yeah. Actually, one example that comes to mind about that is for a very short period of time, probably about, I don't know, 13 or 14 years ago, I thought that I was a young earth creationist. And it was actually the natural evidences that caused me to take a second look at the subject and realize that I wasn't. So that's sort of what you're describing.
Well, no, you were, because when you did believe the earth was young, then you are a young earth. That is your belief. Beliefs aren't something that is in sort of the background, that they change all the time. Like, I may believe that my wife is in the kitchen doing something, right? Just say I heard a noise and it sounded like a fork, and I base my belief upon that. I may have that belief. And then I go outside, she's in the living room, right? My belief was wrong. It's not like, oh, well, my belief was in the background that she's in the living room and I had this other. No, your beliefs can change, and they should change based upon what evidence we have presented to us. But I don't think you can change your beliefs by yourself unless you work really hard to convince yourself of something. I think that if I hear a noise and I'm sorry.
You can of course self-indoctrinate, and
sure.
So in that sense, of course, you can convince yourself of. You can convince yourself of all sorts of things, but it takes some work. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's easily broken up.
Yeah. And so being a free thinker, and free thought is kind of like, I'm not going to automatically believe what I'm told. I'm going to have a system of justification for everything. It's not just taking on what people tell me is true. It's having some kind of justification for that being the case. That's essentially what free thought is. So it conflicts heavily with the indoctrination that churches do. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but churches do it. They indoctrinate people. They give them doctrine that is taken to be true from the outset. That's what it means. So, the whole idea that, hey, I have this belief, and then I found out that I had this other belief, that's not the case. You had two different beliefs, and your beliefs changed based upon the evidence that you acquired.
No, that's for sure. That the whole reason that I gave the anecdote was to show the difference in how the word belief is being used here versus what I'm describing by faith.
Okay, so when you say belief, so really I want to separate, and this might get a little bit philosophical, so bear with me.
Sure.
Epistemology from ontology, right? So when you say young earth kind of thing, and you had a belief in an old earth, you just didn't you weren't aware of that at the time.
Well, the reason that I characterized it that way is because I was very undereducated on the subject, and before I was able to solidify my position, I had already began changing my position.
Right. But really, whether the earth is young or old, the metaphysics of it, which is sort of the actual state, is called ontology, right? So regardless of what anyone believes, just say there's no humans in the universe whatsoever, the ontology is going to be whether that state of affairs is actually true or false, right? The earth is either young or it's old, right? So that state of affairs is the ontology, right? The epistemology is what we believe about it, and they're kind of independent from one another.
Yeah, sure.
So when you sort of thought that the earth was young, you still have a belief that that's the case. And I'm not hassling you in any way for that.
No, not at all.
Understand. I've been totally wrong about stuff. Like I said, I used to think this, and be completely wrong. But those sort of things, the state of affairs that you're talking about, that, I found out that this state of affairs is true, and I think you're using belief like that. that you found out the state of affairs was an old Earth and not a flat Earth as you had previously, right?
Well, I hope I never thought it was a flat Earth, but I agree with your example.
Sorry, young Earth. Sorry, to apologize. To me, they're kind of interchangeable to me, I'll be honest with you.
No, I understand because they both fly in the face of the evidence.
Correct, yes. Yeah. So that state of affairs really has got nothing to do with belief. Like, just say, I absolutely 100% believe that the Earth is flat. It absolutely is. I have all the evidence above. The actual metaphysics of the state of the Earth has nothing to do with what I believe.
Sure.
Right. But whether my belief is true or not is whether my epistemology or my beliefs, or, you know, what my beliefs are, measure up with what the ontology is, whether that is in parallel or it is, you know,
no, and that
is correct or not.
That's the conquest of science. I mean, that's the desire of us as we advance.
Correct.
Is to conform our beliefs to the ontology.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes.
And so really epistemology is asking, how do we get our beliefs to match up with what the ontology is? How do we what sort of systems and what processes do we use to get the mental image of reality in our mind to match the reality that actually is? And we don't know. You know, ontology is something that can't really be touched. No one has a direct line to it. All we have are our justifications. But if I start to use a justification that, well, I just believe it, I just have a very, very deep I have a very, very deep doubt that will actually get you in a meaningful way to what the actual state of affairs is.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the point you're making, but it really does go back to this difference in usage of the word faith, because a person believing from their heart, for instance, that the atoning sacrifice of Jesus made them clean in the sight of God, really has nothing to do with how old the world is or where animals, you know, descended from. It's sort of quite separate. And the reason I think that it's separate theologically, and this is more of a guess really, but it's a different kind of thing. The kind of faith that Paul is describing is simply having the ability to recognize or accept that there is a God that forgives the sins of mankind. And it's not the same kind of belief that you're talking about. It's just that there's not enough words that have been invented to correctly distinguish them. But it's not the same thing as the way that you and I are using the word belief.
Well, it isn't separate from the earth, because Jesus dying and stuff, either that happened in reality on the earth or it didn't. And that's the ontology. Either that event occurred or it didn't occur.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's not separate from the ontology in that sense, because it still will have a state where it either happened and it won't.
Well,
and
you're speaking of the event. What I'm speaking of is the faith that there was a spiritual transaction behind that event.
Correct. Yes. So people have said that there are certain actions you must take regarding this event in order to go to heaven, which again, there'll be an ontology for that, whether that in fact exists or does not exist in reality. So you cannot divorce this from, you know, sort of say, well, it's sort of outside of ontology. It doesn't really matter, because while this event either did or did not take place, and it is a linchpin for certain actions that should or should not be taken. And what I'm saying is that having an understanding of whether that event is true or false will lead you down certain actions which will be better or worse for society.
No, that I agree with. If that's what you mean when you say that they're not separate, then I agree with that.
Yes. So when you sort of say you have faith that it happened, if that
I don't have faith that it happened. I have faith that there was a meaning that was spiritual behind its happening. I mean, I think that most historians believe that Jesus of Nazareth lived. That's not the conversation that we're having. We're having the conversation of whether there was a spiritual significance to his life.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. So, but when you say a spiritual significance, I'm not sure what you mean, because, you know, let's put the spiritual aside. Either the event happened or it did not happen. Like
Sure.
that's a dichotomy. One of those is going to be true. There was either
Yes.
a resurrection or there was not a resurrection. And that whether your belief in that is correct or incorrect is going to have significant impacts, or so I'm told, on your current state of life and the life.
No, yeah,
that
I can
is
confirm
afterwards.
that. Yes.
Right. So really what we're looking at is what is the most reliable way to get at whether that happened or did not happen. And so that's where I think that faith comes in, but I think it is completely unjustified and therefore is not a reliable way to get you to the truth of whether this event happened or did not happen.
Well, the kind of faith that I'm speaking of, or rather the kind of faith that Paul was speaking of in the passage, is that a person, when coming face to face with this information told correctly, finds in themselves that they do agree with it, that they do believe it. It's not a choice. It's a recognition that I believed this all along. I just didn't know it because I hadn't come face to face with it. It's a predisposition.
Well, knowledge and belief are different things, so we may be on different wavelengths here.
It could be a
Because
terminology thing.
well, so knowledge is a justified true belief in philosophy. So it's a belief that you've not only justified, but is in fact ontologically true. And like I said, you can believe something all you want. When you've justified it, you make a knowledge claim. But you seem to be stepping away from the justification part. You sort of
Yes.
say the justification isn't necessary.
Well, you're not
So
seeking justification because you find in yourself that you're not seeking to prove it to yourself. You're not trying to make a case for it in your own mind. You're
yeah,
discovering that against all odds or possibilities, you do believe it regardless of what your conscious mind prefers. That there's
yeah,
something in you that just believes it's true in the face of anything that would come against it. It's a different kind of thing. It really is. It's hard to explain it. Like, I'm assuming that you would profess that you don't have the kind of faith that I'm describing in anything. Is that correct?
correct. Yes, that is correct. Yeah.
I certainly don't want to play the card that I know something you don't know, but I don't know how to not play that card here because I do think it's a hard thing to understand if you don't have it.
Well, I think I've had beliefs that sort of. I don't think I would say I've had the beliefs with the confidence that you seem to be saying, with no justification whatsoever. I think I've had them in the past, but I think as I've gotten older and developed my critical thinking abilities, I think I've dropped those for the most part. So I think at one point I would have faith that everything in the universe was connected by some kind of psychic, field, and we were all connected, kind of thing, and everything was connected. I think I've said, oh well, that is a belief that is completely unjustified. There's no justification whatsoever for that. So that's a belief that I've dropped. And if there is something that I believe that I don't have justification for, I want to drop that belief.
No, I understand that. Obviously, I mean, I think you and I have spoken enough to recognize that we both have critical thinking faculties and we're both interested in what's true. I'll tell you this, and I don't know if this is the kind of phrase that's going to mean anything to you, but I don't think there is anything that could happen, be proven, be disproven. I don't think it's possible for me to drop this particular belief. I don't think I'm capable of dropping it.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm not saying you should.
No,
It's
I'm just saying
that's
the reason I separate it from that kind of usage of the word belief, because that kind of usage requires justification, whereas what I'm describing does not.
Yeah, and I think I'm sort of pointing out the problems with that if you are in fact wrong about the ontology, whether it did happen, then you may be led down actions which are not beneficial because you are not acting according to the state of reality as it is.
And I totally understand that. If the ontology could be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was no resurrection of Jesus Christ, I would be living my life in vain, and I would be enacting principles and actions and things into my life that certainly were not justified in any sense of the word.
Right.
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah. No, I get it. And you know, I just you know, it's fine, and you can believe whatever you want. That's the thing. Like, you can't.
That's the one
tell
thing
people,
that is not correct. I know how you're saying it, but
well, you can't change somebody's mind by just telling them. If
no, but
someone
that's what I'm
believes,
saying is I can't believe whatever I want. This is something that I found out that I believe, not something that I decided to believe.
well, yes, but sort of, when I say people can believe whatever they want, I mean it's you can't expect people to change their minds about
Right,
their
right.
belief. All you can really do is show them, you know, like somebody that believes in something like, you know, that they should get rid of the reptilians that are controlling the government, for instance.
We do got to do
All
something
you
about them.
all you can do is like show them the how their beliefs are impacting the world, kind of thing. And
Sure.
perhaps, you know, I guess for their own safety they might need to be stopped from performing certain actions, but you can't change people's belief, like,
Yes.
about anything. Even that which the rest of society agrees is absolutely crazy, kind of thing. You can't do that. So I'm not expecting you to change your belief. I'm just telling you why I could not use that reasoning in order to believe in something like that. Because,
No, I understand that. Even in my efforts in evangelism, I don't really preach for the purpose of convincing people. I preach for the purpose of bringing it to the attention of people so that they can find out who they are or are not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess in the past, I've, you know, my beliefs have led me down some wrong roads based upon, you know, faith as you've described it. And I know other Christians that sort of have deconverted and said they had faith and it was you know, unjustified. But, you know, you do you. That's fine. I just sort of been explaining what my position is. But it was, I might take off. It's actually getting really late. But yeah, that was a good conversation. And
yeah, man, I always enjoy
yeah.
talking to you.
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks to Mark Stoney and Deviant Outcast. I had a good time talking. I'm really disappointed that I didn't get to talk to Dustin, but if he's too angry, maybe it's for the best. Maybe
I spoke to him on the phone earlier.
Yeah,
I was kind of concerned about him because it's not like Dustin to miss an appointment like this. He loves debates and stuff, and
right.
I texted him just to make sure he was okay because I have his number, and he called me and we spoke for a few minutes. And I don't want to go into the details because it's personal, but
no,
I
that's
think
fine.
that he's a little bit disturbed about some of the ways the community has behaved lately, and I think that he feels as though people could be a little bit more genuine, maybe.
Okay, I don't know.
I don't think it's anything directed towards you. It has nothing to do with you.
Okay, well, you know, I hope it isn't because of me.
No, it
as far as
doesn't.
I know, it has nothing to do with you.
Okay.
Thank you for coming on. Mark, thank you for coming on.
Oh, no problem at all. My pleasure. I really enjoy the conversations I have. It's really fun.
Yeah, it's very, very nice to talk to you. I hope I hope I made sense, and even though I derailed the conversation somewhat, I'm sad to say it might be what I do.
You didn't derail anything. You introduced the concept of goblins, which was important.
Which was fantastic. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've written about them in the side chat when we've been speaking, how I got to know them and so on. Just a short overview.
And thanks to the audience for joining us as well. I really appreciate it. I noticed the chat going. I haven't had a screen open to respond to it, but I hope you got something out of it, and we had a good discussion.
Yeah, man, me and
I
you
love
always have a good discussion.
Of
yeah, absolutely.
That are kind of low key, collected, and not debates with all the claws in every direction and go in as this is a fight, but just.
But I love debate.
Did I win?
I know you do.
Absolutely won all the things. Look, a couple of things. I hate when people say win or lose a debate. I don't think that's what debate's for. I think that Debates are there so you can really put ideas up against one another, but I don't think of it in terms of win or lose. I think of it in terms of holding two ideas up. One person supports one side, the other person supports the other side, and they just basically push them into one another and see what gives, kind of thing. I don't like the idea of win or lose a debate, because it's more just, let's make ideas clash and see what comes out of it.
I heard
I'm more
something-
like
I
it
think-
like that.
Go ahead, do you?
Yeah, I think thinking in terms of, I'm having this debate to change the other or the audience, or make more people believe or think the way I do. I think that's for me at least, a bad start.
Yeah.
I think it's more productive to go into it with a intention to kind of test your own reasoning skills, and have I really, is this as solid as I think it is?
Yeah, I'd
But
agree
that
with
of
sure.
course takes you need to be willing to take some shame upon yourself when you don't. I mean, it's what's the word? Character forming, maybe. Teaching, learning. I don't know. I'm just
Character
throwing
building.
out words. I'm sorry.
Character building. Yeah.
Yeah.
I certainly think somebody like attacking your ideas in a debate format, like they attack your ideas and try to point out flaws in it, it really does give you an insight to what you can justify and what you can't. Like how you can defend the beliefs that you hold. And I think that's really important, that we do have sort of that level of criticism applied to our own positions as well as other people's, kind of thing. But this has been great. This has more been a discussion, and I think that's good too. I really enjoyed it, so thank you so much. But I do enjoy debate. I'll admit it. It's a guilty pleasure. I like attacking ideas and stuff in a debate format. So,
but you don't
I
have
heard something this
PTSD,
morning.
right?
I heard something this morning that I'll leave you with, Mark, that I thought was kind of clever. I think it was Father Chuck that said it, but I can't remember. He said the difference in a debate and a discussion is that a discussion does not require a moderator. And I like that.
Yes, that's probably true, actually. But some debates I've seen haven't required a moderator either. That's the thing. I mean, one's been there, but they're just not required, because both people are fairly, like some academic debates don't require a moderator. Some get absolutely out of control, like these two respectable scientists almost coming to blows. It's incredible. But, it all depends on the personalities of the people, to be honest with you. So, but that's okay. I'm going to take off. Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. And it's been great. Take care.
Take care. Say hello to the best
care.
country in the world.
I want to give a big thank you to every single channel member who does so much to help me and the community have a fantastic time and keep producing more content. Thank you so much, everybody.